At some point in your life, you made a decision that you probably did not recognize as a decision. It was not dramatic. There was no moment of crisis, no visible crossroads, no clear choice between two paths. It happened quietly, the way most consequential things happen, through the slow accumulation of small surrenders. You found something that felt safe, a routine, a role, a version of yourself that other people responded to warmly. And you stayed there, not because you were finished growing, but because the discomfort of growth began to feel less like progress and more like unnecessary pain. And comfort, by then, had learned to speak in the voice of wisdom. This is not a failure of character. It is something far more structural than that. Friedrich Nietzsche spent years studying not evil people, not exceptional people, but ordinary people. People of genuine potential who had, through no single catastrophic choice, arrived at lives that were smaller than they were capable of living. He did not condemn them. He diagnosed them. And what he found, repeated across centuries of human behavior, across every culture and every class, was a pattern so consistent it functions less like a tendency and more like a gravitational field. Comfort is not the reward for a life well built. It is the anesthetic that makes a life half-lived feel like enough. And the most unsettling part, the part that Nietzsche returned to again and again in the architecture of his thought, is that comfort does not announce itself as a cage. It announces itself as peace. It feels like arrival. Like finally, after all the effort and uncertainty, you have earned the right to rest. And in that feeling, in that warm, convincing sensation of having made it, the real diminishment begins. Before the first rule, it is necessary to establish the ground on which everything that follows stands. Nietzsche did not write for the contented. He wrote explicitly for those who felt beneath the surface of their manageable lives the particular unease of someone who suspects they are capable of more than they are currently becoming. He called these people, his real audience, the higher types, not superior by birth, not privileged by circumstance, but differentiated by a single quality, the willingness to look at human nature without the protective filter of comfortable illusions. What he found there was not reassuring. He found that the structures society builds to keep people functional, the moral frameworks, the social contracts, the cultural stories about the virtue of moderation and the danger of ambition, are not neutral. They serve a purpose. And that purpose is not your development. It is stability. Systems, whether social or organizational or biological, optimize for their own continuation. And a person who is fully alive to their own potential, who refuses the expected shape and insists on becoming what they actually are rather than what the system requires, that person is disruptive. And disruption in any stable system is quietly discouraged, not through open opposition. That would be too visible. Through comfort, through the gradual engineering of conditions in which expansion becomes unnecessary and stillness becomes identity. These 7 rules are not a philosophy of selfishness. They are a map of the forces that are already operating on you, whether you see them or not. The question is not whether you will engage with this terrain. You are already in it. The question is whether you will navigate it with open eyes. The first rule, the life you are currently living, was designed by the accumulated weight of other people's expectations. And until you recognize that design, you cannot choose differently. Most people believe their preferences are their own. Their career path, their relationship structure, their sense of what constitutes a successful day, they experience these as authentic expressions of who they are. Nietzsche's most radical and uncomfortable observation was that this is almost never true. He wrote that the individual who has not examined the origins of their values is not free. They are simply unaware of their chains. This was not a philosophical abstraction. It was a precise description of the mechanism by which the majority of human potential is quietly consumed. Your parents had a version of safety they needed you to embody. Your culture had a version of success it required you to pursue. Your immediate social circle has a version of normality it maintains through the subtle but relentless pressure of shared expectation. None of these people conspired against you. But the cumulative effect of all of them is a set of internal constraints that feel like preferences, because you have had them long enough that you cannot remember a time before them. The first act of genuine self-determination, the thing Nietzsche called the revaluation of values, is not rebellion. It is examination. It is the slow, uncomfortable work of asking, of each belief you hold about what you should want and what you should become. Did I arrive here through honest reflection? Or did I arrive here because this was the path of least resistance through other people's anxiety about who I might become if I had been left to find my own shape? This is the most important question most people never ask. And the not asking is the cage. The second rule: growth requires the deliberate and repeated tolerance of discomfort. And every time you choose comfort instead, you are not resting. You are regressing. There is a biological reality beneath this principle that Nietzsche articulated philosophically long before neuroscience confirmed it structurally. The organism, whether a muscle, a mind, or a will, does not maintain itself through use. It develops through stress, through being asked to do what it cannot yet quite do, failing, recovering, and in that recovery becoming capable of what was previously impossible. This is not metaphor. It is the literal mechanism by which capacity is built. And comfort, by definition, is the absence of that stress, which means that a life organized around the pursuit of comfort is, at the biological and psychological level, a life organized around the arrest of development. You do not plateau in comfort. You decline, slowly, imperceptibly, in ways that only become visible over years. But you decline. The confidence that was once available to you gradually requires more scaffolding. The risks that once felt manageable begin to feel genuinely threatening. The version of yourself that was capable of more becomes a memory you tell yourself was probably not as real as you remember. Nietzsche described this dynamic through the concept of the will to power. Not power over others, but the organism's fundamental drive toward its own expansion. When that drive is repeatedly suppressed by the choice of comfort, it does not disappear. It turns inward. It becomes resentment, the specific, corrosive resentment of someone who knows they are less than they could have been and has run out of honest explanations for why. The second rule is simply this: the discomfort you are avoiding is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that you are approaching the edge of who you currently are. And the only way through is through. The third rule: The people around you have a vested interest in your remaining the version of yourself they have already learned to manage. This one lands quietly, because it does not describe enemies. It describes people who love you, your family, your oldest friends, your most familiar colleagues, the people whose warmth is entirely genuine and whose investment in your stasis is entirely unconscious. When you begin to change in real ways, when you start pursuing something that requires you to become a genuinely different person than the one they have organized their expectations around, the discomfort that creates in them is real. And because human beings are wired to restore social equilibrium, they apply pressure, not maliciously, through concern, through gentle skepticism, through the particular form of care that asks carefully whether you have really thought this through. Nietzsche observed that the herd, his term not for lesser people, but for any group organized around shared comfort, exerts its gravitational pull not through force, but through belonging. The price of expansion is, temporarily, the withdrawal of that belonging. You become strange to people who knew you as something smaller. And the fear of that strangeness, the fear of being unseen by the people whose seeing you depended on, is often more powerful than any external obstacle you will ever face. The third rule is a recognition, not a rejection. These people are not your enemies, but their comfort with the version of you they already know is not a reliable guide to who you are capable of becoming. The fourth rule: most people do not fail to reach their potential through lack of talent. They fail through the persistent choice of the familiar over the necessary. Talent is among the most overrated variables in any account of human achievement. History is full, genuinely, consistently full, of individuals of modest gift who accomplished extraordinary things, and individuals of remarkable natural capacity who spent their lives accomplishing almost nothing. The differentiating variable, examined across cases, is almost never raw ability. It is the tolerance for sustained uncertainty. The capacity to continue moving forward when the outcome is unclear, when the feedback is ambiguous, when the most rational reading of available evidence suggests that stopping would be the sensible choice. The familiar is comfortable precisely because it is known. Its risks are legible, its failures are predictable, and a predictable failure is, psychologically, far less threatening than an uncertain success, because uncertain success requires you to remain in the territory of not yet knowing for an extended period. And most people's nervous systems treat that territory as danger regardless of its actual content. Nietzsche wrote that the secret for harvesting from existence, the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously. He did not mean recklessly. He meant with full exposure to the uncertainty that genuine becoming requires. To build not in the shelter of what is already proven, but in the open, where failure is possible, and therefore where real growth is possible. The familiar is a rehearsal of who you already are. The necessary is the construction of who you are not yet. The fifth rule: the story you tell yourself about why you have not changed is the most sophisticated obstacle between you and change. Every person who has chosen the cage has a narrative. It is usually quite reasonable. It involves obligations, real ones, to family, to financial stability, to people who depend on them. It involves timing. The project is coming. The circumstances will shift. The right moment is approaching. It involves identity. This is simply who I am, and there is dignity in accepting that rather than chasing something that may not be meant for me. These stories are not lies. They contain real elements. But Nietzsche was precise about the psychological function they serve. They convert what is fundamentally a choice into what feels like a circumstance. And that conversion is enormously valuable, because circumstances cannot be blamed. They simply are. Whereas choices carry the weight of responsibility, and responsibility, in a person who suspects they have chosen smaller than they were capable of, is an almost unbearable thing to carry consciously. The fifth rule is not a call to abandon your obligations. It is a call to examine your narrative with the same precision you would apply to anyone else's excuses. The question is not whether your reasons are real. The question is whether you are using real reasons to avoid a real reckoning. And here, the pace must slow, because there is a question at the center of all of this that deserves more than a rule. Why do people resist this so powerfully? Why does even hearing these principles produce in so many not relief, but a kind of defensive discomfort, the particular irritation of someone who has been told something they cannot argue with and cannot yet fully accept? The answer is that the comfortable life is not just a set of choices. It is an identity. And identities do not yield to logic. They yield only to experiences powerful enough to make the old identity feel like a costume rather than a self. Nietzsche understood this, which is why he did not write prescriptions. He wrote provocations, texts designed not to be agreed with immediately, but to disturb the settled ground enough that the reader could no longer stand still on it. He was not trying to tell people who to become. He was trying to make it impossible for them to remain unconscious about who they were choosing not to become. The deepest comfort is not physical ease. It is the comfort of a settled story about yourself. And the moment that story is genuinely questioned, not criticized from outside, but doubted from within, the entire architecture of the comfortable life becomes temporarily uninhabitable. That moment is not pleasant, but it is necessary. It is the only door. The sixth rule: the version of yourself that is capable of more already exists, but it requires conditions you are responsible for creating. This is perhaps the most misunderstood element of Nietzsche's philosophy of self-overcoming. People read the concept of becoming who you are as a discovery, as if the higher self is buried somewhere inside, waiting to be excavated through enough introspection. But Nietzsche was describing something more active, more constructive, and more demanding than that. The self you are capable of becoming is not hidden. It is not yet built. It is a project, not a finding. And it requires the deliberate construction of conditions, habits, environments, relationships, commitments, that make that version of yourself structurally inevitable rather than merely aspirationally possible. This means choosing the room that will require you to grow, rather than the room that will accommodate who you already are. It means making commitments that your future self will be obligated to honor, because your present self cannot yet sustain them through will alone. It means engineering your environment so that the comfortable choice and the developmental choice gradually converge, so that staying still becomes, over time, more uncomfortable than moving forward. This is not discipline in the punishing sense. It is architecture. the construction of a life whose structure does its own motivational work, because you built it for the person you are becoming rather than the person you currently are. The seventh rule, and the deepest one. The greatest loss is not the failure to achieve what you attempted. It is the failure to attempt what you were capable of. At the end of a life, and Nietzsche returned to this frame repeatedly because it is the only frame honest enough to cut through the rationalizations of comfort. The question is not whether you succeeded. Success and failure are both available to people who genuinely attempt. The question is whether you played or whether you watched, whether you entered the arena that was actually yours, or whether you found a smaller, safer arena where you could perform competence without risk of genuine exposure. The particular anguish Nietzsche was describing, the anguish he believed was the hidden suffering of most human lives, is not the pain of having tried and fallen short. That pain is clean. It is the pain of having protected yourself so carefully from the possibility of failure that you also protected yourself from the possibility of genuine becoming, and then arriving, at whatever age the reckoning comes, at the understanding that the protection was the loss. The cage was not built by your enemies. It was not imposed by your circumstances, though circumstances shaped its dimensions. It was built piece by piece from the materials of your own avoidance, from every moment you chose the known over the necessary, from every story you told yourself that converted a choice into a constraint. From every morning you woke with a version of yourself that was less than the previous night's recognition of what you were capable of being, and decided that recognition was unrealistic. The cage is real, but it has no lock that you did not place there. And the most important thing Nietzsche ever wrote about this, the thing that sits beneath all of his philosophy of power and self-overcoming, and the revaluation of values, is that the transformation does not require the destruction of who you are. It requires the honest examination of which parts of who you are were chosen and which were merely inherited, which constraints are real and which are the residue of other people's fear, which version of your life is yours, and which is the life that was easiest to explain to the people who needed you to remain legible to them. You do not become someone else. You become more fully and more honestly the person the comfortable life was quietly preventing you from finding. The cage was never locked. It was just more convenient to believe that it was.